the AHI of greater than 50% compared with the baseline AHI. And those that had the narrow velopharynx, you can see that the ratio was inferior airway space over middle airway space was greater than 1, compared to the non-responders, where it was less than 1. And so this study showed that the success rate of the stent for the patients with narrowing the velopharynx was 83.3%. And it actually makes some intuitive sense because the stent itself goes down to the level of the retrocalated oropharynx, so you wouldn't consider to expect that there would be that much influence on the hypopharynx. So what we did was we looked at a dual center study examining the efficacy of the stent in patients with sleep apnea and healthy participants. And the primary outcome was to just look at the change in AHI. And so at Stanford, what we did was we used in-lab sleep studies. They were using the device for about 1 week at home. They had a repeat in-lab sleep study with the stent. They were actually paid $700. And in Tokyo, they actually used a home sleep study, a level 3 device, and they were tested pre-treatment after wearing the device for 2 to 3 days. And then the next night after the baseline treatment, they used the mask. And they also looked at 21 healthy participants without sleep apnea who used the mask according to the protocol. And so it was a non-randomized single-blind study, just adults, no major exclusion criteria. And this shows the breakdown of participants. There were no dropouts in Tokyo. There were 2 that were dropped out due to discomfort and loss to follow-up. So you can see at Stanford, we completed 30. There were 37 completed that had sleep apnea and 21 completed that were healthy participants. And this shows the demographics. It was pretty similar. The only major difference was the ethnicity. Race and ethnicity were, in our state at Stanford, there was more of a spread. In Tokyo, there was just Asians. And when we combined the data, there was significance. At our site, it approached significance, but not quite. In Tokyo, they did have a significant difference pre-treatment compared to post-treatment, and as you would expect, there was no difference in the controls. This shows the pre- and post-treatment changes in sleep parameters. Since at Stanford, we used the full polysomnography, we were able to look at sleep as well. And what we found out was there was a significant difference in the non-REM apnea index. And there was also a significant difference in the obstructive apnea index. When we combined by subgroup, so when we combined all the sites together and looked at some of the differences, you can see that the moderate to severe had an effect as opposed to mild. And we really can't explain why that should be the case. Based on the earlier studies, we expected that it would be more like the mild patients, maybe mild and moderate, that would show an effect. But interestingly, the moderate and severe showed a positive effect. The rest, age and BMI, were significant differences, except for this middle BMI category. So, in summary, these stents can be effective in treatment of snoring and sleep apnea, particularly in those with moderate and severe sleep apnea. There was also, on our side, a significant improvement in the obstructive apnea index. It was fairly well tolerated. Out of all the participants, only 2 participants dropped out of the study due to discomfort. And as shown in one of the earlier studies, it was more effective in patients with narrowing in the oropharynx, velopharynx compared to the hypopharynx. So we concluded that it was effective in this subpopulation, fairly easy to use. It is disposable, single use, well tolerated, and convenient for travel. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk a little bit about some of the work that we're also doing right now, which is looking at some predictive adherence modeling. So, as you know, patient adherence to prescribed medical treatment is a major problem in practically every medical discipline. And there is variable adherence observed with the treatment, especially of chronic disease. And there's many chronic disease states where we're not even sure how well patients will adhere to lifelong treatment for the diseases. And part of the problem too is that there's a lot of deception involved on the part of patients. When we collect these data for secondary gain, like a lot of the studies will have subject fees that will influence them. We just recently published a paper looking at the rates of deception in clinical trials, and we found out that it's pretty significant. Almost about 60% of studies report some degree of deception when they've actually looked for it. Now, it's estimated that 29 to 83% of patients are non-adherent to CPAP, and that's using this metric of less than or equal to 4 hours per night. Now, what we did in our predictive adherence modeling study was we used 2 large obstructive CPAP data sets. Both of these were ones that we did. One was this NHLI APO study, which stands for Apnea Positive Pressure Long-Term Efficacy Study, and this other HRQ supported COMET study that also looked at CPAP patients, where we looked at the difference between patients that were on oral appliances versus CPAP. And we also looked at 3 National Institute of Drug Abuse supported data sets. And from this earlier APO study that I mentioned, one of the intriguing things was even with very close monitoring of our participants, and by close monitoring, we looked at these participants for 6 months, either on active or sham CPAP, and we followed them very closely by both telephone monitoring as well as face-to-face visits. So this was very rigorous patient-physician contact. And even with that in mind, most of the dense usage of the CPAP device was in the range of about 5 to 8 hours. That was the best. And we were recently, in 2016 or 2015, we looked at clustering of the subjects that were involved in this study. What we found out is, as you would guess, there was different types of CPAP or PAP adherence phenotypes, and those were people that were great adherers, good adherers, and then we also classified some as low users and then slow decliners that just over time they would just stop using it. So we're able to characterize it based on a clustering approach to break down these participants in apples. And there are many factors that are associated with adherence. I did a recent literature search trying to look at what are the most key variables, and a lot of them are demographic, also disease type, severity, duration. There's cognitive effects, psychosocial, as you would expect, is a pretty big impact on adherence, as well as health status and treatment, especially things like if you look at burden and complexity. The asterisks are the ones that were in both our apples and common data sets where we collected variables for that. So as you can see, there's a lot of domains. So what were the specific aims of this PAM study? And right now we're just in the midst of analyzing our data. And the first aim was to construct a general calibration-based approach for deriving prognostic definitions of adherence. So what we did is we looked at the association of CPAP adherence and subsequent daytime sequence. And what our goal was to try to look at a better definition of adherence based on looking at daytime sequence. And so what we did was we looked at the threshold, we looked at different associations with other variables as well. So we looked at things, for instance, like age, gender, and severity of OSA. And so what we concluded, and this slide as well as some slides in this particular area aren't in your handout because they're still evolving. We're still in the midst of rechecking our results. But what is interesting is, based on looking at these large data sets, what we surmise at this particular point in time is that when we look at the Epworth sleepiness scale data and the objective maintenance of wakefulness test data that were used in these studies, we came up with that for the threshold for optimal improvement in subjective daytime sleepiness with PAP use, it's really a threshold of 6.8 hours. And if we looked at objective sleepiness, it's closer to 5.4 hours. So this is a little different than here the threshold of 4 hours per night, 70% usage that you're all familiar with, that we look at after 3 months and saying that that's what is considered optimal adherence. This is looking at it from the perspective of daytime sleepiness. So what we're saying at this particular point in time is that a person would have to use it for about 5.4 hours for objective improvement in daytime sleepiness and about 6.8 hours in looking at subjective sleepiness improvement in order to have this type of improvement in sleepiness based upon hours of use of CPAP. But as I mentioned, this is kind of evolving, and we're still in the process of verifying this to make absolutely sure that this is accurate. Now, our second thing was we were trying to develop a statistical model, looking at all these data sets. And as I showed you from the earlier slide, there's a lot of different factors that are involved with adherence, and each one of those factors relies on many different variables that were collected in the different studies that I mentioned in terms of looking at what might be important for each of those domains. So for quality of life, there's a lot of different quality of life measures, and so all these different variables have to be taken into account. So what we're in the process of doing is we're distilling these hundreds of variables that were collected by at least 2 large studies that were mentioned, well actually 3 including the NIDA data sets, and trying to see if there's a statistical method for saying that who might be a good user of CPAP. So we want to be able to predict, just by looking at all these factors, we want to be able to say, yes, this type of person we predict would be a good user of CPAP, this person might not. And what's interesting, this is also preliminary data, we looked just we used a regression model, and we looked at just 2 of our candidate predictor variables. One was the Epworth sleepiness scale score, as well as age, and we looked at it over time. And when we did this, we actually identified 3 unknown predictor variables that had a contrasting relationship over time based on adherence. So we're in the process of trying to match this with all the hundreds of variables that we collected. And then in summary, what we want to do, as I said, when we have all these variables identified and all the variables included in our statistical equation, what we hope to do is be able to ultimately, as I said, predict who might be good users and who might be poor users. And once we do that, we actually want to make these tools available so that any researcher can actually use these equations on any aspect of medicine where they treat chronic disease. And so we're in the process of building these tools right now. We expect to have them done early next year, and we're going to actually place them on our Stanford website, the Stanford Sleep Medicine website, free of charge for who wants to use it. And with that code, we'll actually have instructions on how to download it, how to use it. And then our hope is that other researchers will use it not only for different conditions within sleep, outside of sleep apnea, but also other areas of medicine as well. Okay, now I'm going to be shifting gears and talking a little bit about patient-centered outcomes and cardiac care management approach in sleep medicine. We also finished a study called SMART Docs, and SMART Docs stood for Sustainable Methods, Algorithms, and Research Tools for Delivering Optimal Care study. It was funded by PCORI, and within this study, we introduced a new patient-centered outcomes and cardiac care management approach, which we call PCCM for short. And we introduced new tools and technologies, access to information, both by patients as well as clinicians, collaboration with the patients and physicians, and also primary care integration. We actually embedded a satellite sleep center within primary care to foster better communication. And then what we did was we compared this approach to our conventional sleep medicine approach that we do in our institution. And these are the outcomes that we're looking at: healthcare performance ratings, disease-specific outcomes, global health measures, and healthcare utilization. And it was a randomized clinical trial. So we randomized 1,836 participants. It was a little more men than women. Average age was 50.1. And you can see by the randomization that it was fairly good. It was pretty comparable in terms of gender and age in those two arms. So this is one of the things that we had. We developed actually what was called a My Sleep portal. It was comprised of two different sections. One section provided educational content about sleep and sleep disorders, and we made it so that it was very easy to understand and that patients could download that information and use it to their benefit. We also had interactive videos that were developed by this group on MD Solutions that provided educational sleep videos on sleep apnea, CPAP, sleep studies in insomnia. But what was interesting also about this portal was, and this is not unique, a lot of centers, a lot of institutions have this type of sleep content available to their patients. But, and this shows some of the type of content. So they would log in and they would have, they could look at anything from like sleep tips, to sleep tests, sleep therapies, and then they would click on the button and they'd get this PDF that they could print out or just read. And it was each area or each subtype had just one page, so we tried to make it very simple. So as I mentioned here, this is pretty routine. A lot of sleep centers have this, but the difference was the other section of this My Sleep portal was a password-protected site where they could get easy information about their own sleep condition as well as their progress over time. So it would include a very concise summary of their visit that was enabled by machine learning. So what would happen would be that it would pick out the key relevant data from their visits, put it into a summary report that they could have access to at any time. Additionally, there would be the lab test. So instead of getting the lab tests in just the lab summaries, which oftentimes are very hard to understand, we would provide their lab tests in very easy, understandable fashion. Same thing with the sleep studies. We distilled the most important information into these very simple sleep study reports and told them what we felt, by we meaning our steering committee, tried to derive the most important relevant information that we thought would be good for patients. And this steering committee was derived from not only clinicians, but also industry, patient representatives, as well as people in leadership of sleep to get the most valuable information to the patients. And they can also see their progress over time. So they'd be able to see how, for instance, like the insomnia symptoms by the insomnia severity index or the Epworth Sleepiness Scale improved over time. The reason why I'm saying this is that, we introduced, and this is only one aspect of the study, we introduced these tools and we wanted to see if it made a difference in satisfaction or how they rated their providers was one of the measures. And one of the things we used as an outcome was this health information technology items, and it basically consisted of 4 questions. So each participant was asked, in the last 12 months, how often was it easy to find these lab or other test results on the website? How often were these lab or other test results put on the website as soon as you needed them? How often were these lab or other test results presented in a way that was easy to understand? And how often were the visit notes easy to understand? So the comparison was our own My Sleep website versus Epic My Health, which was what the conventional arm participants have access to. So Epic was our electronic medical record, and there was a already a portal within their medical record that the patients have access to, so they can get the information. So we looked at this head-to-head, and what we found out was that they actually preferred, our site was actually preferred compared to the My Health. And interestingly, what we found out was that providers made a big difference. So providers, the impact on providers, and anything on the positive side here shows provider effects. So that means that these providers have a strong effect on the patient's rating of those particular providers. And we concluded that provider influence on patients, no surprise, cannot be underestimated, and clinicians should be circumspect in their communication methods used to convey information to the patients. And especially with these new technology that we implemented, including this MySleep portal and other technologies, we noted that providers have to carefully frame their discussion, since it will influence how helpful the patients perceive this technology to their care. And it was kind of eye-opening, because when we compared it already to our, as I mentioned, to our existing Epic My Health system, which is used in a lot of different communities throughout the United States, our portal actually came out stronger. And part of that was because the providers really stressed the importance of using this type of technology and took the effort of talking them through it. So we're trying to see if it was a significant difference, this provider effects, but we want to see what characteristics of the provider made the patient have better confidence to use these new tools, and so we're in the process of examining that now. So the last topic I want to transition to is my thoughts on sleep medicine in the future. Now, I'll pick one lab that I'm familiar with, which is Stanford, and what happened was Dr. Dement, depicted here, he started our center in the late 60s to early 70s. And interestingly, we actually had our first sleep disorders medical education conference in 1972. And I pulled this fact sheet back from 1984, where our number of employees was 20. Now we have close to about 100. And you can see that the number of patients seen in 1994 and the first half of 1985 were 767 and 317. Now it's close to about 20,000 per year. And what's also a little interesting is just the payer mix, which is obviously a little different. But interestingly, the diagnostic mix of patients is fairly still close to what we see right now, with the exception of narcolepsy. We have in our entire population, we have a little less than that 12%. So right now, as I mentioned, we have a bigger enterprise, and we have 32 sleep technologists. One of the things that we're really grappling on right now is how to reduce our wait time, because our time for our return visits now is close to about February or March, and also our waitlist for sleep studies is about 3 months. But we are taking active steps to improve that, and who knows how long that will last, particularly with the home sleep tests, which are currently increasing over time. We tried to offer comprehensive care, and that was one of the things early on that we learned from other sites that were closing due to reliance primarily on obstructive sleep apnea. So at that time, we started really trying to foster interdepartmental collaborations, as well as very specialized clinics, which I think help to some degree to our survival at this point, just because these sort of like niche specialty clinics, there are patients that need to be seen for these specialty sleep disorders, and if you have specialized clinics, then you'll get referrals from other parts of the country as well as other parts of the world who want to come in and be evaluated. So, right now, the majority of our patients are seen by face-to-face visits, and pretty traditionally we have our initial patient clinic visit as well as our initial specialty clinic visit. We might get either an in-lab study or a home study, and then we might, in some cases, rare cases, we'll get an in-lab tap titration study, or more traditionally, we'll get the CPAP device ordered and or specialized therapies, and then we have a follow-up, as well as maybe repeat sleep studies. One of the things that we're evaluating right now that we're just starting up is that, and I was having a discussion with this with earlier with Dr. Chediak, is to look at circadian patients. And a lot of, right now, many of our circadian patients with circadian sleep disorders are evaluated by our insomnia clinic specialists. But there are some occasions where they're rather complex. So what we have started doing is we're getting salivary melatonin samples, particularly for those that the patients are really hard to characterize. We also have cognitive behavioral therapy and some light pulse technology that I'll be describing. So for circadian rhythms, we are starting to look at these wearable devices. And in fact, in one of the studies that we're doing now, about 30,000 participants throughout the United States, we're trying to see, we're testing the reliability and validity of these wearable devices. And the output typically looks like this. And right now, there's not a real clear association between these type of wearable devices and some of the more conventional activity. But the product cycles of these devices are improving so rapidly that it's becoming very close. And as I mentioned, one of the things that we're looking at is we look at the dim light melatonin onset assays through the saliva to better characterize the melatonin peak that reliably occurs at the onset of sleep. And then we're also looking at this new technology that was pioneered by one of our researchers, Jimmy Zeitzer, where he developed these goggles that are still experimental that basically give a series of flashes. They're actually 2 millisecond flashes of light that occur 1 per minute for about an hour. And that's enough to do a phase shift of up to about an hour. So just these very brief flashes of light that are non-detectable to the human eye are enough, non-observable to the human eye, are able to actually phase shift the curve. So this is one of the things that we're really looking at now. So where does this all fit? Well, this is what we're hoping will be our future patient workflow. We've already implemented some of these pieces already. So we have this an electronic branching logic questionnaire that helps to help the phenotype our patient called the Alliance Sleep Questionnaire. That's available for you to use to whoever wants to use it. And what happens is we start taking blood samples for screening, for helping to identify markers of these different sleep conditions. I mentioned as part of this new study that we're doing right now, we're giving these patients these wearable devices to help record these sleep-wake cycles. We're working on some machine learning to help with scoring our in-laboratory PHGs. We upload the data to the cloud, and for those in-lab sleep studies, we're characterizing the complex patients that are in our specialty clinics, and also, as I mentioned, those that need a circadian evaluation. So we're using cloud-based services. We're just starting our telemedicine arm that will be implemented starting January. And we're also implementing some of our newer technologies. I mentioned about the adherence. Our surgeons that are closely affiliated with this are starting to use the DOE procedure, which is distraction osteogenesis for maxillary expansion. We're using this matrix device on selected patients, which is a way of titrating oral appliances during in-lab sleep studies. I also mentioned about the hypoglossal stimulation, as well as these new circadian goggles, as well as the nasal stent devices. And the idea is that we'll follow the patients through these telemedicine visits as well as our clinic visits. I mentioned our wait list, and the telemedicine will also help to help with these visits as well. And then we feel that most of the maintenance testing will be at home with wearable devices in our blood test. So the idea is to better incorporate precision medicine to the use of biomarkers for better treatment of patients at the individual level. I mentioned that we're collecting blood samples on almost every patient that walks through our doors, and we anticipate that the majority of patients in the future will be diagnosed, assisted with automated scoring, and treated and monitored with cloud computing at home. In clinic consultation and laboratory sleep studies will be reserved mainly for complex and specialized patients. But considering the large majority of patients with sleep disorders who are undiagnosed and then treated, we expect that all these sleep medicine services will continue to expand. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Dr. Masana. I have a question about the NAS. Is any the increase of incidence of sinusitis noted with NAS use?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it? Is there an increase in sinusitis in those that have sleep apnea?
No, the patient that you use the NAS, nasal airway system.
Oh, I see.
Whether
Yeah.
increase the sinusitis incidence of this patient, and if it's used only one side of the nose, what happens to the other side of the nose? Is there any further complication happens from long-term use of NAS in one side of the nose, or how you address that?
Right, great question. So he was asking about one, what is the effect on the nasal stem on sinusitis, or does it worsen the condition like that? When we didn't have any major exclusion criteria for this regarding sinusitis, but the patients that volunteered for the study actually didn't have active sinusitis, so we don't know what type of impact it would have. My guess is that obviously it would help the one side of the nose as opposed to the other, so you might have that type of positive effect on the one side. Your second question was in relation to just by splitting open one nose, what about the other nostril? Well, in addition to just opening up the nose on one side, we kind of split open the retropalatal or pharynx, and in doing so, that was that helped in general, just even if it was only one side. But yeah, I think that's one thing to look at in the future. If it's on two sides, would that help?
Great job, like always. I have a question and a comment. The question is about the practicality of your approach here as it pertains to the payers and or patients, like to draw blood and so forth. The things that are not routine within the management of disease is always a challenge, at least down here, because we can't get payers to pay for it and patients don't want to cover it. So if we're not going to wearables and this whole other system, and I agree that this is where the trend is going, but how do we convince our patients or our payers to support this kind of growth? So I'll let you answer that, and I'll give you my comment.
Yeah, great question. So right now, I mentioned the biomarkers. We're looking at right now 30,000 patients throughout the United States at different sites, and our goal really for that is to phenotype and genotype patients more accurately in terms of sleep disorders. So what we want to use that data for is to see if there's biomarkers that could be identified, for patients that have these different sleep conditions, and in doing so, be able to characterize the patients better. So the blood test itself, we're not really thinking about your insurance, because basically we're just trying to do it on a research perspective to identify the biomarkers, which in turn will help us to better identify the patients. The wearables, on the other hand, is kind of interesting because the goal of that is we want to see if these wearable devices are just as good as the commercially available actigraph devices right now that are used for circadian evaluation. And what we're seeing right now is that with our preliminary data, some of them are just as good for actigraphs, and they stack up pretty well against in-home sonography. And even what's more interesting is by the time we are able to test one of their prototypes, the next prototype is available. So their product cycles are so quickly that eventually, they'll probably be able to actually measure like sleep apnea and these other things. So in that context, if we can show comparability, then these wearable devices, more specific wearable devices, will be able to probably be insured by insurers down the road, because we'll be able to show comparability of their data, to more traditional devices for a fraction of the cost. Like I think some of these devices are less than $30 a piece compared to a few hundred compared to the same apps.
And my comment was about the nasal airway stent device that you described. If you look at what predicts low arousal threshold phenotype of obstructive sleep apnea, it tends to be milder sleep apnea, more hypopneas, and less hypoxia, which seems to be the kind of patients that didn't respond in your group. So it may be that what you're doing is you're picking out patients who have pharyngeal phenotypes or collapsibility problems and hemiolysis responsiveness problems. And the low arousal threshold phenotype would not respond to a mechanical tube, because that's not the problem.
Absolutely. So yeah, if we were to redesign the experiment, we probably would have tried to phenotype the patients a little better. But you're absolutely right. It probably would fit in those categories that you just mentioned. Thank you.
I appreciate it. This is one of the most entertaining and best lecture I ever hear about the future, and there is a great hope. I have a question. I cannot help myself. Can I ask you, please? I'm just talking about